Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons, and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. Welcome, everybody, to today's show. Today's show is one that I'm really excited about because I just did this with my friend, Jessie Golden. So if you're not familiar with Jessie, the Jessie Golden podcast, I actually was on her show, and her and I become buds over the years, following each other on Instagram and other places. And we finally got a chance to have a conversation directly on her podcast. And I loved that podcast so much and really just enjoyed speaking with her. She's just absolutely brilliant, and I loved our conversation. So I asked her if I could republish her podcast on my podcast, so you get a taste of Jessie and the conversation that we had. And she thought that was a great idea. So you're going to be listening in to her podcast show, and you're going to want to check her out if you don't know Jessie already. She's at Jessie M. Golden on Instagram, and it is the Jessie Golden podcast on Apple and Spotify and wherever your favorite podcast is. And we covered a lot of stuff in this conversation, which is why I want you to hear it. We talked about stress. We talked about metabolism. We talked about mindset and purpose. We talked about the issues going on with men and a bunch of other stuff. And I just really loved the conversation and wanted you to be able to tap into this. And so, Jessie, thank you, my friend. And for all of you, please enjoy today's show.
So, Jade, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jessie. Appreciate it. It's good to be here, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation.
Yeah. So as I was telling you, my family and I, we've been following you for years and years and years. And I learned so much from you. I feel like you're one of the first people to start talking about the metabolism and stress. What led to you talking so much about managing stress and how important that is to weight loss?
Yeah, this one's a tricky one, right? Because we usually think calories and we think that's all there is to it. And partly what happened for me is just using that model and then realizing it was failing most of the time, and then going, okay, what else is going on? And that sent me down sort of this deep study into, hormones. And then I started going, that's not necessarily it either. And so just diving deeper and deeper and deeper into sort of the basics of physiology and what we're ultimately responding to. And of course, you come to this idea that, okay, well, the metabolism is just this sensing apparatus, and it's also a responding apparatus. And then you have to ask the question, what is it sensing and responding to? Yes, it's sensing and responding to calories. Yes, it's sensing and responding to hormones. That's actually what it uses to sense and respond, in a sense, or send signals back and forth. But then you have to go underneath that and go, what is driving all of that? And that essentially is, the imbalances of our environment and the imbalances inside our environment. So what I mean is the things going on outside that we must adjust to, and the things going on inside our body that we must adjust to. And if you want to boil that down to its simplest format, that really is stress. And I know that that is confusing for a lot of people, because when they think stress, they think psychological stress, right? That's what they think. But when I'm talking about stress, I'm talking about what I would call metabolic, maybe a better term is metabolic tension or metabolic imbalance or just metabolic challenges. And whenever you encounter these metabolic challenges, your body has to respond. In fact, it's built for that. However, some of these challenges can last a very long time, right? And so from my perspective, that is ultimately what we're talking about when we're talking about stress. And that is why I began, really speaking about it in a different way. Although, and you could probably appreciate this too, because you and I do the exact same thing. People don't necessarily appreciate that term because it's such a ubiquitous term. It's so cliche in a sense. And so they don't necessarily understand it because it is psychological. We do have to respond to that for sure. And the metabolism is responding to that. In fact, it might be one of the most important, if not the most important thing, our belief around what's happening to us. But it also is these hidden forms of challenges that we honestly can't feel psychologically. And so that to me is where sort of the rubber meets the road in this whole discussion. And it's why people like you and I teach and talk about it. It's also, though, why a lot of the people we teach and talk to tend to miss the point because we have to really dig into what we mean by stress, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've been seeing in your content lately, you've been talking a lot about trauma, and that obviously is a large overload of stress on the system, the nervous system, and the metabolism are very intertwined. So have you noticed any connections with people and trauma and then health issues, weight loss, et cetera?
Yeah, so Jess, this is really, and I know I'm kind of speaking to the choir here, so I want your opinion too, because we're both experts sort of in this space. But here's what I've seen, and it's this really weird sort of dichotomy. What I've seen is people who've had a lot of trauma tend to do very well, and people who have a lot of trauma tend to do very poorly, right? And there's this so it's like, well, what do you mean by that? What I mean by that is that there seems to be people who've had a lot of stress and difficulty and trials and tribulations and traumas in their lives who just excel and seem to have somehow built some kind of resilience, metabolic resilience, psychological resilience from it. And then there's these people who suffer from trauma, trials and tribulations who seem to be metabolically challenged and almost destroyed by the trauma. And this is still something I'm trying to unpack. But to answer your question sort of more directly, to me, there's absolutely a direct correlation between trauma, trials, tribulations, chronic sort of stress around the stories we've written about our traumas and how it translates into how our metabolism functions. Yes, even right down to body composition and the inability to sustain a diet, maintain fat loss, all those kinds of things. And I know that when people hear that, it's just something they just go, that can't possibly be. But if you just understand, and I'll just briefly state this, there's just one very simple way to look at this. The command and control center of the metabolism is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus drives lots of different things. Most importantly, appetite regulation and cravings is kind of being controlled there. The hypothalamus also is the crossroads where we deal with our metabolic challenges in terms of trauma and psychological stress and things like that, and where those early adverse events that we might have in childhood tend to disrupt that crossroads. So actually, once you understand the science, you go, oh, that's not that esoteric. That actually makes some sense. There's this area that is in control of response to stress that also is in control of response to hunger and cravings. And if you put those two together, you can see that a lot of issues we may have around food and cravings and hunger and the inabilities to sustain or maintain dietary control and regulation and that kind of stuff absolutely are coming from the same area that we may have issues with if we had stress, if that makes sense. So once you get down to it, it actually is pretty simple, straightforward physiology. It's just that most of us don't put those two things together.
Yeah, I do think it's so interesting. And I would agree that I think we need a more holistic approach when it comes to weight loss and health, that we can't just say, oh, it's just focused on the food and the exercise or just the physical. I do think you have to look at the whole entire person, their emotional health, their mental health. And I noticed, actually was just looking at a post of yours about the nocebo effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something I have found is that when I was suffering with, people called it adrenal fatigue, and then they called it HPA axis dysregulation. Now it's like nervous system dysregulation, whatever you want to call it. It's having a bunch of chronic health issues. And I got to a point where I realized, oh, I'm making this worse by the beliefs I'm having about it. I was victimizing myself to the whole situation. And that was perpetuating all of my symptoms. And it wasn't until I said, I have to completely shift my identity away from this and pretend almost like none of these things exist, that I got better so much quickly after that.
Yeah, that to me is such a beautiful sort of succinct way to say what we're talking about here. It's also incredibly difficult. In fact, I'll tell you, you and I are very much alike on this, and that I have this same belief. But right now, I'm going through, as we talk right now, I'm going through some really stressful business stuff that I haven't dealt with in like a decade. And I'm trying to, sort of balance this. And my girlfriend is basically, she's very much into belief and communication and other things. And she's having to remind me to sort of look at this differently. And in my brain, I know that. But in my, sort of response, I'm having a difficult time doing it. And it's incredibly frustrating. However, what you're speaking to, and just to frame this up for the listener, and I know you educate them on this kind of stuff probably all the time, but just to kind of frame this up, this nocebo effect is this idea of, it's the negative belief effect versus the placebo effect, which is the positive belief effect. And it is the most powerful thing in all of medicine, the placebo effect. In fact, we can't do any good trial unless we account for the idea that people might believe just by getting a treatment that they're going to get better. And just by that belief, something like 30% of them do. And this is why we have double-blind placebo-controlled studies. So now if you understand that, as the listener to me and Jessie having this conversation, you can understand how Jess and I, have this experience where if Jess is in this position where she is believing negatively and catastrophizing every aspect of her health, then absolutely that could be making things worse. Now, we haven't unpacked in science exactly how this works. Obviously, we don't actually know how the placebo effect works. We just know it works. But if the placebo effect works, then we absolutely know the nocebo effect works. Both work. We just don't know how they work. And so we are in this sort of gray zone, I think, when you're talking to people like Jessie and me, or listening to us talk, practitioners working with people, where we know it works. We just don't necessarily know the best practices to get it to work in people. We also know there's certain people who are more or less susceptible to nocebo and placebo. And we also don't necessarily know if there's certain conditions that it works better for or not. You know what I mean? So it is an interesting aspect of this. But yes, to me, this is 1000% going on. Our belief is impacting our physical conditions. We just don't know to what degree. We don't necessarily know all the interactions. And there, of course, could be, as if me and you were talking 5 to 10 years from now, Jess, we might be saying, oh, like we now know that this is more prevalent for things like autoimmune conditions or mental, emotional, sort of mood issues, but not so much for things like muscle function or whatever. Maybe we'll find out. I suspect, my guess is this permeates every aspect of our being and every aspect of our physiology. From my perspective, it just needs to. However, I'm also an evidence-based guy who goes, I really want to understand this, and figure out what it is so you and I can give evidence-based approaches. But that doesn't mean that people like you and myself are not using, tools right now that are evidence-based. For example, things like written exposure therapy, things like meditation, things like what I would call something that I'm developing, which is sort of this be it until you see it action in the world, and actually showing up a particular way that you may not necessarily see yourself like currently, but you can play a role as if you are that thing, kind of like a method actor. And I believe these things make a profound difference on sort of our outcomes. And of course, I want to study this stuff, so I'm going back to get my PhD with everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I want to do some direct research sort of in this area. I think it's incredibly powerful. And I think people like you and me are, there's not many practitioners doing, and talking about these things, to be honest with you. It's time to talk about one of our sponsors of today's episode, AG1 by Athletic Greens. Now, many of you have heard me say this before, but I am not a fan of vegetables, which I know is funny given I've been in the health and fitness industry for so long. I blame my mother and father for this. When I was a kid, what they would do was essentially take the broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, the spinach, the collard greens, and just steam them. No salt, no fat, no taste whatsoever, just these bitter greens. And so I developed a distaste for a lot of different vegetables, which has stayed with me into adulthood. One of the things I've done to mitigate that is use a greens powder pretty much ever since greens powders have come out on the market. And I've tried every single one. They started out tasting like swamp water. I found a few that I really like the taste, but recently, one that I have been taking for a very long time, as you all know, I wear a continuous glucose monitor. I found that it was actually spiking my blood sugar because probably the tapioca starch in it, which some people don't respond to tapioca starch with elevated blood sugars. I was. And so it sent me on a mission to find another one. And one of my friends turned me on to AG1 by Athletic Greens. Now, I've heard about Athletic Greens and AG1 for quite some time. I just never tried it. And now that I have tried it, I have become a huge fan. So much so that I partnered with Athletic Greens and AG1 to sponsor this podcast. Now, let me tell you what happened here. After I saw that my blood sugars were spiking, my friend gave me a couple samples of AG1. I began using those and testing the blood sugar and found there was no spike. The other thing I found is that AG1 is interested in its taste profile. It's very neutral. The one I was taking before was a little sweet. I really loved it. But this one is very neutral, which actually suits me because what I found is I can actually not only take this first thing in the morning in water and have it taste very neutral, almost like there's nothing there. I can also add it into my protein shakes, which means now I'm getting double the greens that I was getting previously because I add this right into my protein shakes and it does not change the flavor of the shake at all. The other thing I realized once I started looking at the label is that this product is not simply a greens product. It also is a multivitamin, multimineral. It also has fiber, which acts as a prebiotic. It has probiotics in it, and it has functional mushrooms, which act as adaptogens in it. That's 4 different products essentially in one. And I've been taking mushrooms for some time. I stopped taking them now because now I have this in my greens. I have also taken my multivitamin and make this my multivitamin. So I'm actually saving money, and this is going to save you money as well. The product AG1 is also NSF certified. And you're going to say, Jade, what does that mean? The National Sanitation Foundation is a foundation that essentially does testing on products to make sure there are no harmful substances, no persistent organic pollutants, no heavy metals. Now, this costs money to do. AG1 and Athletic Greens has spent the money on this. They spend money on making sure that the product that you are getting is good quality without contamination in it. You might say, well, Jade, isn't this true of all products? And actually, no, it is not. If you ever follow some of the news in this area through consumer labs and other things that do testing on these products, you'll see that many of them will have trace levels of things like mercury and cadmium and lead and things like that in them because they're not doing this testing. So this is an extra piece of insurance for us. The other thing I love about this product that I learned as I was doing my research on it is that this is the 52nd tweak or adjustment they have made to this product in their existence. AG1 has been tweaked 52 times. Now you might say, well, Jade, why would they be doing that? And the reason why is because they continue to improve. We know that science is evolving. We know that it's not just about more nutrients. It's about balanced nutrients. It's about the Goldilocks effect of this. And they are constantly learning, as we all are, and then constantly adjusting their product to taste better, to be more efficient and effective in delivering the nutrients. It acts as an antioxidant. It acts as a multivitamin. It's a prebiotic, a probiotic, and an adaptogen all in one. They have mastered this over several iterations of this particular product. And so I am a huge fan right now of AG1 and athletic greens. And I'm hoping that you will check this out. It's time for all of us to reclaim our health and arm our immune system with convenient daily nutrition. And AG1 does that with just one scoop in a cup of water every single day. That is all you need. There is now no longer a need for a million different pills and supplements to look after your health. All you need is this particular one. It really clears the stage to simplify your supplement regime. To make it easy for you, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/next level. That's athleticgreens.com/next level to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Check out AG1. I love it. I know you're going to love it. And I'm so happy that they are on board to sponsor the podcast as well. Thanks so much. Check out AG1, athleticgreens.com/next level. And let's get back to the show.
I love that. You're going to get your PhD to study the impact that beliefs have on our physical reality.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, my PhD work is going to be in transpersonal psychology. So I'm already, basically enrolled, and I'm beginning that process. Of course, you know me, so I've been doing this research for years. But for me, I want to get just more involved. And to me, I'm definitely one of these people that goes, you know how people say you got to be an out of the box thinker. And to me, I go, well, if you don't know what's in the box, you can't think outside the box. And so I want to know what's in the box. And so when we talk about transpersonal psychology, that is the psychology of how we relate to ourselves, but more importantly, like how I relate to Jess and how, I relate to the environment and how those things are impacting me to a very large degree. Your emotions, Jess, are contagious upon me. Right. And mine are contagious upon you. And even our energy that we're bringing to this conversation is contagious upon the listener. Now, of course, there's ways that we all can talk about mitigating some of that because, yes, we know this is the case in real world, but we don't want to just be, sucker punched by other people's emotions all the time. So we have to work around that. And so for me, this study that I'm going to do in transpersonal psychology is really about how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and how we see our relations between ourselves and the world. Because in a sense, if we get a little bit woo-woo and spiritual and into some consciousness stuff, you and I are not separate in a sense. We are sort of, different tentacles in the universal octopus, so to speak, right? So like we have different perspectives on what the ocean is in our little neck of the woods, but we really are connected to this thing. And that's what this study is about. It goes right into nocebo, placebo, belief effects. And then it goes right into where you and I spend a lot of our bread and butter, which is, at least up to this point, which is, metabolism and physical change. That's how come I don't think you can separate physical change and physical development from personal development. So when people ask me what I do for a living, I say, I work in the fields of physical development and personal development. And usually I say what a lot of people don't know is the personal development is probably the more important of those two, in my opinion, if that makes sense.
Completely agree with you. I really don't think you can see any lasting physical change or development without doing the personal development work. I almost view it as identity work, which sounds like kind of what you're saying, that you have to shift who you believe yourself to be, show up as that person. There's a book, I still need to read it, but I was listening to a podcast about the alter ego. Kind of like Beyonce shows up as Sasha Fierce, that's her alter ego. And then eventually you kind of become that person.
Yeah. And I have experience with that myself. Just to give the listener some context, when I was coming up in high school, right. And Jess and I were talking offline before we got on with you guys about our siblings. I have two older brothers and an older sister. And, my older brother was the smart one. And my middle brother, this is the story I told myself, right? My older brother was the smart one. My middle brother was the really good looking one. My sister was the really sweet and kind, loving one, which left me trying to find a role for myself. And the role that I played was the dumb jock, sort of tough guy image. And I played that role to such a strong degree for so long that it was very difficult for me to get out of that. And people often laugh that, I barely got into college. I almost flunked out of high school, because I missed so much school. I would skip school and then, go to football practice basically, because that was my identity. And then right around 18 years old, I switched that identity. I started, and I didn't even know what I was doing at that time. We didn't have books and research studies. I wasn't necessarily into all that. I was reading muscle magazines and stuff. And I started dressing differently. I put on glasses. I didn't even wear glasses at the time. I started just dressing sharper and paying attention to the way I walked, the way I moved. I started to, make sure I articulate better, because I was very self-conscious about my accent at the time. And I played into this role. And at 18 years old, I went from essentially barely getting into school, almost failing out of high school. And I made straight A's through college my first year. And everyone freaked out, including me. Right. And so this sort of, I was just like, wait a second, and it took me a while to walk fully into that. And I was like, wow, I didn't even realize I was playing a role of a smart kid, but I didn't necessarily believe it, but I was being it until I see it. That's why I don't like the term fake it until you make it, which we can talk about. But I was being it until you see it, playing this role. And of course it showed up because I had to take actions in the world. And this is what we're talking about here. And that little anecdote works in every single aspect of our lives. I had to rewrite my story. So if you're listening to this and being like, health and fitness is hard for me, that's a story. If you're listening to this and saying career is hard for me, that's a story. If you're listening to this saying personal relationships are difficult for me, that's a story. And those stories come along with patterns that repeat, obstacles that recur, emotions that stay stuck in your body. And those repeated patterns, recurrent obstacles, stuck emotions tell you and point you towards your story. And then once you uncover that, you can begin living into a different story. And that different story has different actions in the world. Obviously, if you're reading Peter Pan and you switch to, the seven dwarves, there's a whole different thing that's going on. And so what happens when most people are trying to make change is they go, well, I'll stay partially in the Peter Pan story and partially in the seven dwarf story. No, you have to shut the book on Peter Pan and you have to open up seven dwarves and immerse yourself in that story. And this is, to me, the beginning of the magic that you have experienced when you went through your health difficulties and you were just like, I'm just not going to relate to this in the same way anymore. Same thing that's happened to me. And actually right now at 50 years old, right, I'm actually going through it again, I think, because I've had some really difficult business struggles as of late. And I'm like, okay, it's hard, right? I'm like, I have to rewrite that story now. And here's another beautiful thing, Jess, and I want to see what you think about this because I just think this is really cool. Partly as I've dovetailed into this personal development work and away from metabolism work to some degree, I'll always do both. But as I've done that, life has said, okay, Jade, you want that? Like, here's the new story. Here's the new page, right? And it's so, as much as I trust to some degree, sometimes I trust, sometimes I don't. As you go through stress, you'll find you vacillate back and forth. Oh, I trust it's going to be great. Oh my God, it's going to be horrible. Mm-hmm. Right. But it's basically, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm like, here's the old book I was reading. Here's the new book I want to read. And life has a funny way of going, you said you wanted to read this new book. You said you want to be in this new story. So here you go, figure it out. And any new story is a little bit disorienting at first because you don't know where it's going to go. It's far better after you finish the book and I could go, hey, Jess, you would love this book I read. It's blah, 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 versus you catch me and you were talking and you're like, what book are you reading? I'm like, oh, it's about, you ever catch someone when they're first in a book and you're just like, you know what, I'll ask them again after they finish it because I have no idea what they're talking about. Neither do they, because they're like, they're in this, they're excited about it, but they haven't put it together yet. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what it's like, but you have to own it completely. So I guess the final thing I'd say about that is, for any of you struggling through these processes in what I would call the 4 jobs, there's really 4 areas: health and fitness, finance, personal relationship, and purpose and meaning. When we struggle in those 4 things, you have to ask yourself, what storybook have I immersed myself in? Am I in Harry Potter or am I in the Matrix, or am I like, what story am I actually living from? And you can't do well or make sense of life if you're living from trying to live from multiple stories at the same time. That's why you have to get rid of these traumas or not get rid of them, so to speak. I don't think it's that. You have to go back and look at them and understand how they influenced your story. Because a lot of the stories that we live are these knots, these tiny little knots that we tied in our subconscious mind a long time ago that we don't know about. Again, Jess and I were talking about siblings, right? So I tied a knot of, I'm the dumb little brother kind of thing. And that story, by the way, that dumb little brother story, what's Jade's role? Like, I'm not worthy or whatever, that comes up. It even comes up now because I got that little kid living in me. You know what I mean? And so in a sense, we have to be aware that now this is not a conversation most people have because they're just not aware that entity, like little Jessie and little Jade, right? They're still alive. We have to be in dialogue with them, and they have a story. And when we get stressed and scared, their story comes out. It comes out pretty strong. And then we have to come in and step in as the adult Jessie and the adult Jade and go, hey, okay, calm down. Like, I know. And we have to parent ourselves in a sense. And in doing that, we can begin to transcend some of this. And in doing that, we can begin to accomplish things in these 4 jobs that we had not been able to conquer previously.
Not agree more with everything you just said. I love the book analogy. I ask myself when I'm in a state where I'm trying to shift, I say, okay, what glasses do I want to wear today? Am I going to wear the glasses that, okay, I'm going to victimize myself today, or I'm just going to stay comfortable? Or am I going to wear the glasses that have the beliefs and the thoughts and the actions of the new version of me that I want? But to your point, it sounds like you're kind of in the goo phase of the caterpillar before it becomes the butterfly, where it just feels like chaos.
Yeah, I am. And I love that analogy too. I'll probably steal that from you too. That's why I like having these conversations, right? Because we can take different things from each other. So I'll probably take Jess's glasses analogy because I like it. It's like, okay, I'm wearing a yellow filter today, or I'm wearing a red filter today, or
yes,
or I have the polarized filter on, or I've got the very clear filter. But yeah, I think so. I think that what I'm reminding myself is that ultimately there's only one real certainty in life, which is change. And change, you could say change and death, but they're basically the same thing. We die one physical death, but we die a million psychological deaths. At least we should. And I think I'm killing off another psychological, Jade, and hopefully birthing a new one. So I love your analogy of the butterfly too, because it's sort of just like you go into the cocoon phase, then you come out, and then you run into another pattern. Then you go into the cocoon phase again, and then you come out, and you run into another pattern. And you have to make these cycles. And let's face it, many of us get stuck in certain areas our whole lives. Like, I have a contention, and this isn't a judgment, so I hope the listener doesn't feel this way, because I'm this way too. But I think we mostly die. We mostly go through our lives, and we mostly die as teenagers, struggling through this culture level lens of, am I good enough? Did I do the thing? But when we're in our power, and to use your example of, sort of the butterfly, when we're in this process, it's never complete, by the way. But when we grow and change and grow and change and grow and change and up level mature and gain wisdom and gain wisdom and gain wisdom, we're in our next level human state. And that state's, about a sort of growth and not being authentic to our current self. This is the mistake when you think about self-development. People go, be authentic to yourself. And I'm like, yeah, not really, because you don't want to be authentic to your current self. You want to be authentic to that future self, like what Jess was describing about living into that feeling state and that action state and that aligned state of her future reality. The future Jess that is, the powerful, coach and whatever. I don't know what how you see it, but whatever it is that you see, yourself living into that. And so we need to be authentic to that versus authentic to the other place. And when we do that, we can ease up a little bit on the culture level needs of safety, security, acceptance, and belonging. And that's what I'm going through now, by the way, right? So I just go, Jade, I know you want to be safe and secure. Little Jade, I'm talking to him, Jadey, so like you want to be safe and secure. And then my, tough guy, teenager self, he wants to be accepted and belong. And I go, but what do you really want at the end of your days? What you really want is you want to have grown and learned and made a difference and mattered. And in order to do that, you have to break free from those other pieces. And it has everything to do with how we show up in those 4 areas of life.
I love that, what you said about the reparenting too, because I've noticed that if I'm not aware, the way that I quote unquote would parent myself just unconsciously is by being overly controlling. That's kind of my mode that I can easily get into, is just going into hard push grind, because that's what was modeled to me. That's how I was literally parented. was
Yes.
you messed up, you need to go harder, get yourself in line. But that's not actually what's healing to me or that little inner child in me. So have you noticed for yourself that when you are talking to that little version of you, that you have to kind of change the way you're talking to it?
Yes. And actually, it's so funny because I will even get into a very aggressive sort of stand toward life, like like a competitive aspect of things. It's sort of like I can easily fall into the work harder, just grind it out thing. Whereas the Taoist side of me and the Stoic side of me goes, relax. You don't need to make this a thing. And the Taoist side of me goes, you'll know the action when you're ready for the action, right? So, to me, and this is a really hard thing. Actually, it's still hard. So the listener, I wouldn't be surprised if you're just like, oh my God, shut the hell up. What are you talking about? Like, it's super hard because Taoism essentially says, the way to emotional freedom and sort of is no way and no action. And most people, when they peripherally read like Taoism and some of the stuff, they go, that's ridiculous, because you have to work hard and this and that, whatever. It's not saying that. It's just saying the action will become apparent to you when it is time. And I still can't own that fully because, to your point, my little kid and the way I was sort of parented and just with my siblings and everything else. And what to a large degree has worked for me is let's go, let's get it, let's grind, you just work, you outwork it. And I do think you can't forget as you go through this. Yes, that absolutely works for sure. But what you forget is that it's a role in the process. It's not the process. So I would argue, and I'd be interested in what you think about this, is I would argue, so like if we're talking about me and Jess and you all, the listener listening to this, just think about how you were parented or what your early upbringing would be. So what will happen with Jess is there's probably an aspect of that controlling aspect of her that is useful in some way. It's at least to little Jessie or little Jess. I don't know what your little girl's name is, right? But but at least useful to her in some degree, and probably has some use as your adult self. The key though is to integrate it in a healthy way, and not to let it dominate in an unhealthy way, right? And so same with me. So my ability to work and my capacity to just grind and get lots of things done really quickly is very useful. And I don't want to. So to me, one of the things is, the Russian nesting dolls. I forget what they're called. Where there's a doll, a tiny little doll, and then another doll on top of that, then another doll on top of that, right? And there's sort of like these boxes within boxes within boxes within boxes. To me, what we tend to do is we tend to throw out things like your controlling aspect that you want to have, or my sort of competitive aspect and grinding aspect that we want to have. I think what a better approach is to integrate those things. And the whole world, by the way, if you just look at spirituality and you look at nature, it's integrative. Everything's integrative. Like, the molecule has within it the atom. It doesn't disqualify the atom. It includes the atom. The cell includes the molecule. The tissue includes the cell. The body includes the tissue. Like, it's just this never ending thing. And nature does not just discard that way. It uses, right? And it evolves from those lessons. And so what I would say to that is, I would say what we need to do is we need to take all the lessons, because that's what makes Jess unique and what makes Jade unique and what makes all of you unique, is that our trials, our tribulations, our pain, we don't want to discard them. Actually, we want to look deeply at them because they point towards our purpose. And we want to look deeply at them and integrate the lessons and discard the things that are the stories that are unuseful. So in a sense, take the experience that you've had, take the lessons from it, and try to get rid of the judgment, around it. Right. And that's very hard to do because we can't always see how the world necessarily sees us. And so we're all a little bit, in my mind, I think we're all a little bit, we think a little too highly of ourselves, and we think a little too, and we're a little too hard on ourselves. We vacillate back and forth between, we think we're super special and we think and to me, I go, actually, we should use that, because I think that's the right place to be like, I am powerful and I can do anything I want. And I'm also not special at all. And in that place, you find and again, that's Taoism, right? Yin yang. In that place, you find your balance. The insecurity and the sort of I'm not special keeps you down to earth and lets you know that you got to pay attention and stay open and learn. But the sort of arrogant part of you, the powerful part of you goes, I will take risks because I can do it. Mm-hmm. And if you let either of those sides get too out of control, you're in trouble, in my mind.
I completely agree.
It's time for one of our sponsors, and this sponsor is a very exciting one and a new one, Timeline Nutrition and their supplement Mitopure. Now, if I was going to ask you what is the most important aspect of metabolism, the mitochondria would have to be tops on your list. The mitochondria are the little energy producing factories inside every single one of your cells. They take the end products of the food we eat, they break them down into cellular ATP and provide energy for the entire metabolism. And these mitochondria, if they are healthy and acting appropriately, can keep us looking good, feeling good, living longer, and functioning better. However, when they are not at optimal function, when they are burning energy in a dirty fashion, when they are damaged, they actually speed cellular aging. They speed up the aging process. We end up suffering from things like fatigue. We end up having all manner of dysfunctions, including weight loss resistance and other issues around weight loss. The mitochondria are the most important elements for the metabolism to function optimally, lose weight, age appropriately, etc. In this compound, Mitopure, that Timeline Nutrition has developed, there is a product called urolithin A. Now, urolithin A is an interesting compound because it is a postbiotic. Now, what does that mean? A postbiotic is a compound that is made from the bacteria in the gut. And so when you eat things like pomegranates, strawberries, walnuts, things with polyphenols like this, they go into the digestive tract, your gut bacteria start working on them, and they can create compounds. Urolithin A is one compound that is in the Mitopure product. It comes from, naturally occurs in nature from this bacteria in our gut that break down the polyphenols from primarily foods like pomegranates, strawberries, etc. And it can increase mitophagy in mitochondria. So you might say, well, Jade, what is mitophagy? Mitophagy is the ability for mitochondria to repair and regenerate and recycle their proteins and to stay healthy and functional and de-age. When we can stimulate mitophagy, we can keep our mitochondria functioning efficiently. We can decrease aging. We can increase energy. We can improve our ability to lose weight, function optimally, and stave off diseases of aging. This is what Timeline Nutrition has done with their Mitopure product and the urolithin A that is in it. This is a very exciting area of research. We have not had the ability to support the mitochondria in the way that we do now with this particular product. You definitely are going to want to check this out. I've been taking the product for several months now. It is one of these products that I really, really strongly recommend. To get the product Mitopure, all you have to do is go to timelinenutrition.com/next level. timelinenutrition.com/next level. And let's get back to the show.
I think that's really interesting. I forget who I was listening to. He was saying that he studied the most powerful or successful people in the world, and they had those two qualities, that they simultaneously had a deep insecurity that they were trying to overcome, but at the same time, they felt like they were almost better than everybody else at the same time.
Yeah. And I struggle with both of those, don't you? Right? I bet
oh,
you.
Yeah, completely.
Sometimes I'm just like, I can't believe like this and this and this when I'm being catty and being my base level self. I can't believe this person or that person. Then I just go, oh, I'm being base level. And then at other times I'll be like, I'm horrible. Like, I can't believe how dumb I am or how stupid I am or whatever. And I go back to that, dumb jock thing or whatever. And now I think the first step to this is, and there's a whole therapy based on this, acceptance and commitment therapy, it's called. And so we use this when we're, sort of working with people, that you essentially go, you accept both of those sides. So not only do we have to integrate our little child self and our wounded child and our rejected teenager, right? We have to integrate those two. We have to be in dialogue with them. We have to also be in dialogue with these other parts of ourselves, and just accept that this is partly who I am. And instead of rejecting it, because if you do that, it's going to come out even stronger. It's very much like if I tell myself, I'm Italian, I love cheesecake and wine and pastas and stuff like that. And if I just go, I'm not having any of that stuff, inevitably I binge all day, every day on those things, instead of being like, okay, like, I'll have a little bit and I'll indulge a little bit and I'll find some balance in that. I think if you look, the degree to which you are extreme in your thought process about yourself and don't accept, sort of these various aspects of yourself, is a degree to which you will find wild swings in the other four jobs, right? These are the people who will have wild swings in their romantic relationships, or wild swings in their health and fitness pursuits, or wild swings in their financial career, or wild swings in sometimes they feel purposeful and sometimes they don't. It's the people who, get into this acceptance place. And if you love Brene Brown, like I do and other people do, she speaks a lot to this. She just calls it vulnerability. For me, I call it, sort of being open and available for the mess.
I love Brene Brown. Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way to look at it. And one of the things I think you model so well, Jade, I've seen a lot in today's online space. There's a lot of mistrust because you see a lot of people, big names, and I see this more with men. I don't know if it's just the way I'm looking at things, but the call out culture and people creating camps against one another. I mean, and these are grown men doing this. And then everyone has different letters behind their names. So people get very confused and say, everyone's pointing the finger. I don't know who to trust. Yeah. So how do you recommend a listener sift through that information and handle that as a consumer?
Yeah, that's really great. We all get it, right? And I'll tell you something about this. I do think this is a masculine trait. So I actually think you're correct. It's just that when we talk about male, female, sex, right, versus masculine, feminine energies, masculine and feminine energies are an archetype. So we're not necessarily saying, because I agree with you, it is a masculine trait. It's a masculine trait to be segregative in your thought process, to be very logical, to be kind of competitive, to, sort of be sort of a single-mindedly focused, right? It's the feminine quality to be more flowy, more integrative, more inclusive, right? And so there are plenty of women who are having masculine type of coming at this from a very masculine perspective as well. Like you'll find that same behavior in women who are who their sex is female, they're cis hetero females, but also masculine in their energetics. And I do think that masculine energetic of call out culture and exclusivity and all of that is not the way forward. It's not where we are in the world right now. I definitely am a big believer in the feminine, sort of archetype needs to be very much included. And I do agree that from the perspective of culture, it's mostly men who have an imbalanced masculine. It's just unfortunate because a lot of women are also now having an imbalanced masculine as well. And so now what we need is males and females to balance their masculine and their feminine. And when that happens, you won't find that kind of behavior. But let me speak to it directly to your question, because your question was, how do people move through this dynamic? From my perspective, you stay open to it. And to me, you'll find very fast. It's like how I look at politics and leaders, not to get political, but I just go, any leader who is divisive, dehumanizing, exclusive in their rhetoric is not a leader I want to vote for. And unfortunately, in our political culture in the United States, both sides and the leaders from both sides are often like that, which leaves me in a very peculiar place because I'm like, I don't like either place because they tend to be, I do have my druthers in terms of who I think's worse in that regard, but I won't necessarily get into that because I don't want to trigger people. But to me, what you can do is you can look at in the nutrition space too, and you can see who's being divisive, who's being dehumanizing, who's trying to be exclusive. And from my perspective, if you find that, I would suggest humbly that you begin to take what they say with a bit of a grain of salt. That doesn't mean, by the way, that they don't have very important things to say and very important things that you might need to know. But the thing is, if you make that your religion and your identity, you're falling into the same trap they did. Instead of going, oh, that's interesting, I'll just take that and I'll see the rest as their insecurities. And I would say find people who are a little bit more inclusive, open, and interested. And you can hear it. Like there's language that is used. Perhaps, maybe, more studies need to be done. I'm interested in their perspective. Like these are the ways that people who are more balanced in masculine and feminine qualities approach things. And also, for example, a very feminine quality is I want to hear what they have to say. I'm very open to what they have to say. And a very masculine trait in this field would be I'm interested in the evidence, right? So to me, it's like, it's both, right? So I'm interested in what the evidence says. And I also don't think all the evidence says everything there is to say, right? Like people like you and I'm a clinician primarily, and so are you, right? We work with people. And so the more you work with people, you realize a lot of this evidence base falls apart very quickly in the unique physiology, psychology, preferences, and practical circumstances that a human brings to the equation. And one of the things I'll say for people who talk about evidence-based practice, medicine, nutrition, fitness, whatever it is the true definition of that actually has it right. Evidence-based practice is know the research, know the client sitting in front of you, and take their individuality into appreciation, and also trust your intuition and clinical judgment because you'll need it. And that's really what evidence-based medicine is. And those things, when you're listening to people talk, you should be able to pick that out. I'll just give a couple examples. If you're following someone who's like, keto is the answer, it's the only answer, everyone else is an idiot, that's an example of what I'm talking about. Or fasting is the answer, it's the only answer, everyone else is an idiot. That's something I'm talking about. Versus someone who goes, I really like keto because it has X, Y, and Z. I've had a lot of good practice, but also paleo is great. And I've certainly seen vegetarians and vegans who've done well. And there's lots of different ways to approach this. That's a different way. Now, one of the things you and I would probably agree, and it's frustrating for the listener, is, okay, that's great, but we all know that our base level selves want safety and certainty and security. So there's something very nice about having someone go, this is the answer, the only answer, this is how it is. So I can understand why people gravitate towards those types, but inevitably, right, what happens? They find it doesn't work, and then they have to go find something else. And so, yes, it's a little bit more confusing and a little bit more uncertain and scary at first when you start trying to incorporate all thoughts and opinions. But very quickly, your identity comes around, this idea of, I'm someone who's open to all these answers. And that's how you build wisdom. No one overcomes, their ignorance by staying singularly focused in one aspect of thought, right? And we're all ignorant by nature, of course. The only way to get better is to open yourself up. That's how come for me, I want to learn from you. That's why I love these sort of podcasts. People might say, well, Jade has this degree and Jess has this degree and Jade has this thing and Jess has that and Jess's way is better, right? And I go, there's no question in my mind that certain things you're doing, I just don't know. And I want to learn them. And there's no question in my mind, there's certain things I'm doing and saying that you certainly don't know. And I want to learn them by you and I coming together in conversations like this. And we've kind of been buds online for a while. So we kind of, know each other's work. But I've certainly absorbed some of your perspective from following you and being exposed to you and vice versa. And to me, whether we realize it or not, and this is in every aspect of our lives, we are an experience and an example for the world. And when people interact with us, we are passing on some of our essence, energetics, intelligence, emotions, etc., to that other person. And from that perspective, that's how I show up and approach the world, actually, Jess, because I just go, my intention today is to do the best I can, despite what I'm going through and, whatever I'm dealing with. My intention is to show up in a way that is a positive contribution to my personal growth, their personal growth, and the evolution of the world, right? That's how come I say in my company, Next Level Human, I'm like, we're only here for three, sort of reasons in a sense: to learn, to teach, and to love. And to me, you do that by setting your task to go, I want to grow myself so that I can enrich others, so that I can evolve the world. That's a very feminine, sort of way of seeing things. The masculine part would come in there and just be like, and I want to do so by being honest, being in my integrity, having, not taking on, being very, sort of solid with my alignment and my authenticity and that kind of stuff. This sort of solid, rigid honor code, let's go in this direction. And both matter. What's going on, everybody? Jumping into the show really quick. It's time to cover a sponsor. And this is a new sponsor that I'm pretty excited about. Let me give you a little background on this. You may not know this about me, but back when I was in medical school, at naturopathic medical school, I actually was a consultant for one of the leading spas and skin therapy spas in Seattle, Washington. And one of my jobs there is that I was looking at research on all the things that were really good for skin. And back then, this was in the mid to late 90s, there was kind of not really much going on with skincare. And this was the beginning of some of the skin lines actually coming out and putting botanicals and antioxidants and all of these kinds of things in their products. And so these were like topical supplements that people were actually putting in to their skincare lines and putting on the skin. And one of my jobs was to really look at that research. Well, we've come a long way since then. The only issue is that most of these companies that are really doing a good job on this stuff are mostly for women. You don't see a lot of male lines for skincare. The other thing about skincare that really kind of drives me nuts is you get these two types, right? You get these sort of skincare products that are for the masses that really have just a ton of icky stuff in them, compounds that you really do not want to be putting on your skin. And that's one, side of the equation. And the other side of the equation is these companies that are essentially putting nothing but natural agents on your skin, things like coconut oil and harsh clays and this kind of stuff that even though they're natural, they can be pretty occlusive for the skin and, cause some issues for the skin. And so this is why I'm excited about this particular sponsor. This sponsor is called Caldera Labs. They specialize in male skincare. And in my opinion, they get this right. They take the best of the natural compounds with the best of current science, and none of the toxic stuff goes in their particular products. And they are combining these products for men in particular. The other thing I love about Caldera Labs is they are actually doing their own testing. And so one of the studies that they have done that has been released is they took 50 some men, all between the ages of 35 and 65, and basically had them go through their major product line daily using their cleanser, their base layer moisturizer, and then their serum at night. And after 8 weeks, they looked at subjectively what the men thought of their skin. But they also used analyzing technology to analyze acne, wrinkles, color discoloration on the skin, etc. And what they found was an 89% improvement in radiance and luminosity in male skin, 87% improvement in fine lines and wrinkles, and more even skin tone in 85%. Now, in terms of the men actually liking what they saw, 96% reported that they felt their skin looked healthy, 91% said their skin was less dry, and 91% said they had smoother skin. Now, one of the things about this is not only is Caldera Labs using the best of natural agents and modern science, they are actually testing their stuff. So from my perspective, this is what we want. I have started using these products. I'm about 2 or 3 weeks in right now. I'm really liking what I am seeing. And this is why I have partnered with Caldera Labs for you men to have a good line of skincare. I laugh about this. A lot of my girlfriends and friends laugh about this, but I love facials. I love skincare. I love anything that has to do with, reducing the appearance of aging. I don't know, call me a little vain, but I think Caldera Labs is getting this right. And they have a special code for you for listeners of my podcast. You can go to calderalab.com, get 20% off their best products. Use the code JADE, or you can go to calderalab.com/Jade. And if you're asking me, hey, Jade, what should I get? Well, what I'm using right now is I'm using their base cleanser. That's the clean slate, the base moisturizer. And I use those in the morning. And then at night, I use the clean slate again. And then I use the serum, the good. I have pretty oily skin, so I use a couple drops of that. And one of the things I really like is they have this product called the Icon, which, let's face it, as we age, puffy eyes, bags under the eyes, those kinds of things. And so I'm really keen on this icon. I've been using this in the morning and the night under my eyes for fine line, dark circles, and puffiness under the eyes. Go over to calderalab.com/Jade. Check out what they have to offer. Use the code Jade on checkout for 20% off. And definitely let me know what you think. And thank you so much to Caldera Lab for getting into the male skin care space. We've been needing you, and I'm happy you're here. Let's get back to the show.
Yes, I think that's such a beautiful way. And I'm going to take that from you, is the waking up in the morning and saying, how can I show up? And I'm responsible for the energy that I'm giving the world around me. Yeah. And I just too often am focused on myself rather than how am I showing up and impacting. It's my responsibility to impact those around me positively. So it's a really good
and you know
reminder.
what I'd say to that? That's really interesting. I feel the same way you feel. It's almost some guilt we have around saying I'm a little too focused on myself. What I would say to that is when you're in your authentic alignment in terms of being self-centered in that regard, but you're in your authentic alignment and you're in your purpose, right? So what happens is a lot of people go, if you're sort of self-centered in the way of I want the world to give to me, that's a whole different thing than self-centered in the world of I want to grow so that I can give to the world. Right. And so there's nothing wrong in my mind with being self-centered in a way that I want to grow so I can enhance the world. That's sort of the next level human way of looking at it, that I'm always integrating myself and other simultaneously. And certainly that means I'm somewhat self-centered. It also means I'm also equally other-centered. And that's how right? You wouldn't be doing this work in my mind. Anyone who sort of knows this knows, like, there's a lot of great things. You can make your own, schedule and time. And that's a lot of the self-centered stuff. However, you're also putting out a ton of energy. You're exposing yourself to a lot of hate and a lot, so this is definitely other oriented, when Case, I'll just, come to your defense here in case you guys don't know this. Jesse and I don't know each other that well. We have followed each other, but in case you don't know, as she puts herself out and does her work, she's being exposed, you might love her, you listen to her stuff, but she's being exposed to a lot of negative trolling and hating and this and that and all these other things. No human voluntarily exposes themselves to that stuff if it's just about them, right? They do it because they want to matter and have a sense of self-assurance and self-esteem for themselves, but they also want to have impact with you. That's what sustains it, right? Like, you're not going to just, with all the kind of hate that's out there in the world that can come your way when you're exposing yourself and doing your work, you wouldn't be able to do it and sustain it over the long run if it was just about you, which is why I would say, if you really want to know who's in it for, sort of purpose versus ego, that's one good way to tell that they keep doing it despite the fact that they get a lot of hate. And you do. When the bigger you get, the more exposure you get, the more hate you get. And you have to just take it and be like, this is a challenge for me to step up and keep being authentic. Life just does that.
Again, you're a great model for that. I take a lot of inspiration from you in the way that you handle those situations when you receive that hate. And particularly for the guys in my family, I think that's been really inspiring, because I don't think, and I'd be really curious to hear your state of men in society today. It seems, haven't validated the statistics, but that their mental health is on the decline for men.
Yeah.
And from a lot of the men, I love talking to the men in my life about this, why that is. A lot of them say they don't have role models. It wasn't modeled to them. They just had the toxic masculine traits that we were just talking about. What is your take on that?
Yeah. You got two brothers, right?
Yep.
Yeah, hopefully one day I'll get to meet your two brothers and hang.
Yes, I would love that.
I do think that this is it's a sad place where men are, but I do have, to me, what I think is an incredibly solid answer. And you can ask your brothers whether they agree with this or not. Here to me is the issue with men. Men have this deep need to, just like I think women have this deep need. Now we're humans before we're males and females, by the way, right? So let's just, and as humans, we need safety, security, acceptance, and belonging. But what I think may be unique about men is and this may be, I haven't figured out whether this is completely cultural and or built in, sort of the genetics or differences or whatever. I have spent my whole career trying to understand the differences between the biology and biochemistry between men and women. One of the things I think I understand about men is they want to win and be of service at something, and they need to to feel like they are winning. The worst thing you can say to a man, if you're a cis hetero female involved with a cis hetero male, is to tell him he's a loser. It's literally the worst, or make him feel like a loser. Men want to win, and culture, in my mind, and this is the problem that men are having. Culture is a game. This is what it's like to be a man. Imagine you are tossed into a game that you don't necessarily completely know the rules, but you know there are certain things that you must get for people to accept you. And if you don't have those things, you will be seen as lesser than. And those things are going to be like money, car, house, good looking girlfriend or partner or whatever it is. And you feel like if you don't have those things, or you're rejected in that way, you're somehow losing. And the problem to me with men is men are supposed to stand for something authentic within themselves, not stand for something false within culture. And what they're doing is they're standing for something false within culture. So they're falling hook, line, and sinker into this game, this false narrative of you got to work, and you got to be powerful, and you got to be strong, and you got to be a monster, and you got to be a dangerous, but you got to have that under control, and you got to make money, and you got to have a nice car, and you got to have these things. And if you don't do that, you're not a true man. Right. And to me, I go, no, a true man is simply a man who knows who they are, knows what they love, and steadfast chases that, whether that's gardening, whether that's being an artist, whether that's just being out in the woods with, an axe and a saw, whether that is being a nurse, whatever that is. Men need to own what they love, and they know what it is when it's there. They just also go, I can't love that and do that and also have all the things that culture says will make me a man. Culture cannot define you as a man. What defines you as a man and as a human, I'm speaking to women too, is you saying, this is who I am in the world. I am a unique spiritual fingerprint. I have a unique time in the history of humanity that I'm here. I occupy a unique space. I'm unique in my personality, my pain, my passions, my superpowers, right? My personality. And I own that. And I have this deep need to do something that I love and know I can do in a way that only I can. And I will do it regardless of what culture says is valuable about that or not. And as soon as I don't tap into that, don't find that, and or abandon it, I will be miserable. I will put myself in an incredibly difficult state. And I'll give you an example, then I'll shut up. But I'll give you an example for my father. My father, to me, epitomizes what a man is. Now, he decided when he had his first child, my oldest brother, that he was going to be the best father that he could be. And what that meant for him was move out of New York City so that, he stopped drinking and hanging out with his buddies, go down south to North Carolina, work at a bank, get his schedule so that he could go in at 6 a.m. and get off at 3 so he could be at all his kids' practices. There was not a practice that he wasn't at for me and my brothers and my sister. He took an hour and a half to be with my mom for every lunch, which, I oftentimes joke that I'm going to tell, that was against the rules, but he did it throughout the 30 years he was at this particular bank. And he used all his income. He has no retirement because he spent it on us, sending us all to school. And he's the most respected, well-loved man that I know, right? People love and respect my father. He's the epitome of man. He basically, people still come to him that I'm not even friends with from high school and go see my dad, because they're like, this was my father too, right? And my father to me is a very purposeful. Now, none of that looks good from culture's perspective. He started out as solidly upper middle class when he had my older brother. Then he was middle class by the time my sister came along. By the time I was graduating from high school, we were lower middle class because my dad was pouring everything into his kids. But we weren't lower middle class in terms of love, in terms of a father that was there for us, right? And the legacy of that, the fact that my dad played his own game. And that's what men need to do. They're struggling because they're not playing their own game. I'm not saying go be my dad. Go be what your essence tells you to be. Make the choices for what you want to do. And when you're living from that place as a man, and it's same for women, right? I just think men suffer from this a little bit more because we are still, unfortunately, in a male-dominated culture. I really do, like, people might get mad at this, but to me, I'm like, there is such a thing as masculine toxicity. We are in it. Men are dominating. They still dominate our culture. We need that to end in a sense. We don't need it to end by women being toxic masculine. We need it to end by males and females balancing their masculine and their feminine. And a male that is completely in culture level mindset can't do that in the same way that a woman that's in completely culture level mindset can't do that. So the idea is play your own game. And when you do, you escape the matrix. That to me is the matrix. The fact that you think you got to play this culture level game, it's not built for you. You got to decide your own game and you have to play it out fully. And when you do that, no one can take that away from you. And you're shielded in a sense from everything. When I started medicine, I was going to go to conventional medical school or naturopathic medical school. This is going back to 1997, right? And back then, like, it's all popular now, but back then, it was like I was a witch doctor and a quack. And I just said, I'm going to be a witch doctor and a quack, which is why today when someone calls me a witch doctor and a quack, I go, yeah, you're right, because I chose that. Like, I am a witch doctor and a quack, and I love it.
That's awesome. That's hilarious. I love that too, because they can't own anything about you then, because you're owning that within yourself. Yeah. That is, and from a straight woman's perspective, that is actually the most attractive thing I find in a man, is when he has his own values, not what everyone told him to value, his own values, and he's willing to live according to them and get uncomfortable when necessary to stay in congruence with those values. To me, there's just inherent trust and safety in a man like that.
Yeah.
And so I think
same with me with a woman. I would be most attracted to a woman like that as well.
That's interesting. Yeah, this topic fascinates me because I do think women have become over masculinized in that toxic masculine side as well.
Yeah. And you know what? I just had my ex-wife and we just did a podcast on this together with Jill Coleman's my ex-wife and our good friend Danny J. And one of the things we were talking about is that idea of, sort of the more masculinized woman. Thank God for those women who did that, right? Because they needed to battle the toxic masculinity that was there. I just think, and perhaps I'm wrong, and I won't speak for women, and women can maybe think say this is good for them or resonates or not. But I go, those women, thank God for them, because they did get they did allow women to get to where they are in culture. And however, now I think it's time to go back for to that balanced masculine feminine in all of us. Regardless of how you, by the way, regardless of how you orient in terms of your sexuality, like, these are just archetypes. It's not male, female. It's just masculine, feminine archetypes.
Mm-hmm. That integration of the feminine that you were talking about.
Yeah. 100%.
Well, Jade, I was not expecting our conversation to go this direction. I had some other wellness things for you, but we'll save that for another podcast at another time.
We definitely have to do another one. You and I definitely think along a lot of the same lines. But
yes, this was long awaited for me, something I've had on my list for a long time. So where can people follow your work and how can they work with you right now?
Yeah, you right now I'm on social media like all of you, right? So at Jade Teta, Jade like the stone, JADETETA, on all the social medias. I have a website, jadeteta.com, and like Jess, I have a podcast. It's called the Next Level Human Podcast, and that's the place to look at me there. And if you want my metabolism work, if you know me from that space, metabolic.com is where to get me. So Next Level Human. metabolic.com, jadeteta.com. And yeah, just love your work too, Jess. Thanks for what you do, seriously. And hello to your family, and thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on, Jade.
You have been listening to the Next Level Human podcast with Dr. Jade Teta. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe and consider leaving a review. You make the biggest difference when you pass on your lessons and inspire others. That's why reviews like this are so powerful. Your words may be the only ones that resonate for someone else. Please remember the information in this podcast is for educational purposes only. Always consult your personal physician or therapist before making any lifestyle changes. And finally,
Thank you for who you are in the world and the difference you make.